Hey friends, welcome to Halfway There. This is the show where we have honest conversations with ordinary Christians about today's Christian experience. My name is Eric Nevins, and I can't wait to share this episode with you today. Today, our guest, I'll tell you what, if it is summertime and I'm out and about, he's on my radio, and he has an amazing story that I can't wait to share with you. I think you guys will enjoy it. Our guest today is Jerry Schemmel. Jerry, welcome to Halfway There.
Thank you, Eric. I appreciate it.
It is really great to just connect with you and hear a little bit of your story. But it's cool. You're one of the radio announcers for the Colorado Rockies here in town. That seems like a dream job.
Well, I can't complain too much about it. You know, it's you get paid to go to the ballpark and watch baseball and talk about it. It's a pretty good gig. No doubt. I'm a huge baseball fan, except don't tell anybody, but I'm kind of a Cardinals guy. So that's okay. That's fine. I'm good with that.
We show up at Coors Field every time the Cards are in town, which is once a year. So,
all right.
Anyway, well that's cool. Yeah, it's kind of fun to just chat with you after hearing you on the radio so much. I can't wait to hear your story. Your story is definitely amazing. God's done some amazing things for you. Why don't you just tell us a little bit about kind of who you are and where God has you now, and then we'll go back into your story.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in South Dakota. Small town kid, Madison, South Dakota is 6,000 people, and I went to school at Washburn University in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. I played baseball there, and I got a broadcast journalism degree. Also got a law degree from Washburn University, and practiced law for a while, Eric, in Topeka for 4 or 5 years, and kind of did broadcasting at the same time, kind of part-time with each. And then I got a big break in 1991 when I started with the Minnesota Timberwolves. It was their second year, and I was doing radio and TV for them for a couple of years. And then another big break came to Denver in 1992 to become the radio announcer for the Denver Nuggets. Did that for 18 seasons, and then started with the Rockies in 2010. So I'll be, this spring, starting my 10th year with the Rockies.
Wow.
So kind of a long journey, but a fun one, and a lot of action packed in those 30 years.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's one thing that people don't know about sports from a broadcaster's perspective?
That we just don't show up at the ballpark and flip the switch on.
Right.
There's a lot of prep, but there's a lot of background. There are long days, no complaints again, but long days, long season. But a lot of people think, I just show up, before game time and hit the switch and go on the air, and that's not how it works. It's a 11, 12-hour day every day for baseball, and I think a lot of people don't quite get that.
Yeah, I've always wondered about that because, you make it sound easy when you talk about different players and where they are on the diamond all the time. And I can barely keep up if I'm at the ballpark, I had no idea that guy came into right field. So,
yeah, well, it takes like anything else. You get better at it the more you do it. And, hopefully by now I should have figured it out.
No doubt. Oh, that's cool. Okay. Well, that is an interesting part of your story, but I want to go back. So you mentioned you grew up in South Dakota, small town in South Dakota. What was that like for you? And, we think of the Midwest being sort of good values, family, probably some religion. What was that like for you?
It was awesome, to be honest with you. Mm-hmm. It's something I can never replace. I mean, I just put a lot of value on the way we were growing. It was small town, 60s and 70s for me. And when people hear this, they don't believe it, but we never locked our houses, never locked our cars. Yeah. We kept the keys in the ignition in the car, so we wouldn't lose them. You could ride your bike anywhere. And in the summertime, we would do that. We get up and go and come back for dinner time, and Mom and Dad would have no idea where we were all day. We just out doing stuff, and that really was the way it was. It was a great childhood. It was a fun place to grow up. A little isolated in small town South Dakota, but I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Yeah. What was the religious climate like for you at home?
I grew up in the Catholic Church, and not with a family that practiced religion a lot. Didn't talk about it much. Just kind of showed up on Sunday mornings for Mass, and that was really about it. That was the way we were taught, was that as long as you show up on Sundays, everything's going to be fine. Realized later that wasn't the case, that was probably something that was mistaught and probably might be still that way. But that's kind of the way it was. It was not a lot of emphasis put on it at all. We just go to church when we were told to go.
Yeah, that's interesting. There seem to be kind of two stories that I hear from people who grew up in the Roman Catholic Church, either maybe three, but at least kind of like yours, where it's like, this is just a thing we do and it's kind of tacked onto our life, or, sort of like, this is everything we do and it's just full of guilt and shame.
Yeah.
Not always.
Well, yeah, no. And I think my story probably, Eric, is a combination of those two. I think it was, that God has got a gavel in his hand. He's watching you. You better not mess up, because if you do, you're going to be in serious trouble. Yeah.
And that affects you, right? It affects how you think about who he is and his love for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's not, I found out later, not accurate. That's not the way that God operates.
Yeah. And you found that out, kind of in the aftermath of the plane crash that you were in South Dakota, or in Sioux City.
Mm-hmm.
And so would you say that that's the moment that you found Christ?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
It was, I could pinpoint it. It was about a year after the crash, actually 10 months after the crash, and having had a lot of problems like everybody else did that survived the crash, with survivor's guilt and all the stuff that comes along with post-trauma stress disorder. And I just was in a tough place, and finally decided that I had nowhere else to turn but to the Lord. And I did that, and I'd never opened a Bible, had never read the Bible. I just, like I said, showed up on Sunday morning and went through the process. And I realized that there was a God that I had misjudged, that loved me and wanted the best for me and wanted to forgive my sins and wanted me to live with him forever. And I finally figured all that out after the crash, and because of the crash, because of a real difficult place that I got in about a year after that.
Yeah, well, I think that's understandable. So, dropping a plane crash on our friends listening to us today, that's a big story. So let's go back and fill in some of those gaps. So you were working with the CBA, and you were trying to hop on a flight headed to Chicago and then on to Ohio. Was it Cleveland, maybe?
It was Columbus.
Columbus, okay, yeah, on Ohio. And then, and you were on this plane. And so just tell us a little bit about that story and kind of what your experience was with it.
Yeah. Flying from Denver to Chicago, going to make a connection in Chicago. Actually going to the CBA college draft, the CBA, the Continental Basketball Association. Back then was the NBA's minor league system. We kind of ran that, myself and Jay Ramsdale, who was the commissioner. And we were supposed to fly at 7:00 in the morning. Our flight got canceled. Got on a plane finally at, I think, about 2:30 in the afternoon, or close to that, Mountain Time. And, we took off for Chicago under perfect conditions, Eric. It was 83 degrees when we left. There was no expected turbulence. We were in a DC-10, which is a jumbo jet, big plane, 296 people aboard, completely full. And we got about halfway to Chicago. It's about a 2-hour flight from Denver to Chicago. Got about halfway there, 59 minutes in the flight, when this explosion happened. And to give you maybe an idea, or listeners an idea of what I say when I say explosion, the first thing that I thought when I heard it, and then I felt it a couple seconds after that, kind of moved to the cabin, was that a bomb has gone off. Wow. I thought a terrorist had planted a bomb. It had been detonated. And we started to drop, and I thought, this is it for everybody. A terrorist has planted bombs, been detonated, and we're going down. And we did for about 30 or 40 seconds, and then the plane eventually kind of eased back up, came out of that drop, and after a couple of minutes, we leveled off again. We were in serious trouble, but we actually leveled off again and took some of the panic out of the cabin.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. So this is everybody's worst nightmare, right? Like,
yeah.
Oh
yeah.
Man. What was your first thought? So you thought that, okay, we've been bombed, but like, what are you thinking about in those moments?
I'm thinking strange things enter your head in those situations.
Yeah.
As we were going down, dropping, I was trying to calculate how many people were on the plane. I mean, I don't know why. I think it was because, all right, we're gonna hit the ground, we're all gonna die. I wonder how many people this tragedy is how many lives are gonna take. So I started to calculate, and I came up with 200 in a matter of seconds. I was way off. There was almost 300, but that was what I was thinking initially. And then I was thinking, all right, well, this is it. I mean, we're all going to hit the ground sometime soon here, and that's it. I think I've lived a pretty good life. Then the third thought was, this is all in a matter of seconds, obviously, was I am so glad, I am so thankful my wife is not with me on this flight. as I always traveled, thought, oh, it'd be great to have Diane with me, and I miss her, and I wish she was here. This is the one time where I was so thankful she wasn't with me and didn't have to go through this.
Yeah, that's so interesting that one of your first thoughts is gratitude.
Yeah, it was for me. I mean, it was, this is a terrible thing, and it's going to be a terrible tragedy, and 200 people. I didn't know it was going to be 300, or could have been 300. But I was thinking, I'm thankful for one thing, and that's that there's one fewer person on the plane. That's my wife.
Wow. Yeah. And she ends up being instrumental in your kind of finding Christ afterwards, which is awesome.
She sure was. Yep. She was a Christian woman from the day I met her.
Oh, that's great. Okay. So you were on the plane for like 45 minutes before it actually landed in Sioux City. And you did some interesting things, like you were trying to comfort other people. Like, what was your kind of thought process through that?
Yeah, it was. We had so much time because, number one, they had trouble getting control of the plane. That took a while. And then once they got it heading for Sioux City, which is where we were directed to make this emergency landing, the plane kept veering off to the right on its own. They couldn't control the direction of the plane, so we had to come back and line up. I think we did that 3 or 4 different times, which is why it took us so long. But it was, I think initially we're all going to die. And then we came out of that drop and leveled off and we were told what had happened. I still was convinced that I wasn't going to make it. And I just thought, all right, well, do whatever you can to try to help other people. If we hit the ground and you're dead or hurt seriously, you can't do that, but don't panic. Don't flee the plane just in case you are alive. And so that was my thought, was to try to comfort a few people before we hit the ground. And if I happened to be alive and not hurt seriously after we came to a stop, then I told myself I was not going to panic. Don't panic. Don't flee the plane. Just stay in and help, and stay in as long as you can and do what you can. Yeah.
Which is, I think, actually a really fascinating perspective of trying to help other people. That says a lot about you.
Well, I think because my wife wasn't with me, Eric, it made a difference.
Oh, that's
by myself. My travel companion was sitting 7 rows back. We couldn't get out of our seats to go talk to anybody. So I just kind of talked to people around me, and there was not much else I could do, to be honest with you. We couldn't, and we were strapped in, and because it was such a dangerous situation. So, I'd like to say that it was my character that I would help other people, but I think in that situation, everybody was doing the same thing.
Yeah. And what else can you do? You're not in control. So for our friends who haven't either heard your story or read the book, you didn't know this at the time, but the hydraulics were crippled in the back, right? Because of the explosion on the tail of the DC-10. And so that, they couldn't steer the plane. They couldn't, do any kind of the normal stuff that they would do to direct the plane or slow it down.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. When hydraulics are taken out, you eliminate basically all your controls. And the other thing they realized they couldn't do was slow the plane down. It was a 3-engine aircraft, and they lost the number 2 engine. It exploded, but they had the 1 and the 3, the wing engines left. But they realized if they slowed both of those engines down, they're going to lose control of the plane. They tried to slow the airspeed down, couldn't do it. So the biggest factor was our speed when we hit the ground. A normal DC-10 landing is about 125 miles an hour when you touch down, and we actually hit at 255 because they couldn't slow the plane down. And like you said, no steering, very little control of anything, but that airspeed was really the biggest factor.
Yeah. So I was totally mesmerized, and this is probably not an unusual reaction to your story, but as I was reading that moment for you when the plane hit the ground, just how scary that must have been, and what some of what your experience was like there. Do you find, it sounds like you're okay talking about it now, but what is that like now to talk about that?
I think I've never had a problem talking about it. Yeah. Obviously, if you write a book, you probably are obligated to talk about it.
Right.
But, and I always thought it's good therapy. I think what I've found, Eric, is over the years, I've found really 2 general groups of people that survived our crash. Group 1 is the ones who have talked about it, and they're the ones who are doing pretty good. They've been able to move on and still achieve dreams and do cool things. And then there's the other group that from day one refused to talk about it, refused to acknowledge it even, held it all in, and those are the people that are struggling still today, almost 30 years later because of the crash. So I thought it was important it's never going to go away. It's not it's going to be part of my life forever. Nothing's going to change because I do or don't talk about it. So let me just face it head on and talk about it. And maybe in the process of talking about it, doing like you and I are doing today, have a positive influence on somebody in some small way. I think that's one of the reasons I survived, in my mind anyway, I survived the crash.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's a way that God often will use things like this. He'll bring some good out of it if he, I'm sure he can.
Absolutely.
So that's part of the power of the gospel of what he does.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. Okay. So can you just, for our friends who haven't had a chance to hear this story, like describe those last few moments or describe what the crash was like from your perspective?
Yeah. We had actually, because we had so much time, practiced the landing position, practiced the emergency landing brace position. So flight attendants took us through it. We practiced it not once, but twice. So we knew once we came in the final approach what to do. And that was when we got the word to brace, we did that. You tuck your forehead in the seat in front of you and cross your arms, hold the top of the seat back. We knew what we were doing. We had done the drill already. But I think, Eric, I thought about the touchdown and the crash and all that. I don't think anybody was ready for how hard we hit.
Oh yeah.
It was just such a jolt. It was like we dropped out of the sky and hit the ground, which is pretty much what we did because we hit it 255 miles an hour. But I never envisioned that we would hit down that hard and immediately inside the plane. I mean, immediately, first couple seconds, bodies are being thrown around. Some still strapped in their chairs. Their chairs had given. Bodies thrown from their chairs, and smoke and fire and debris. All in the first couple seconds after we hit down. I mean, I guess you should anticipate that because we were told it was going to be a crash landing, but I don't know if anybody was ready for how hard we hit.
Yeah, that was one of the things that really struck me is that the people flying around and still attached to their seats. You described it, and I was wow. That's you wouldn't expect that, but yeah.
Yeah, it was, and then after a few seconds, saw all this happening, and then it felt like the plane had hit down, and I knew in the first couple of seconds, I started thinking to myself, all right, there's people dead, a lot of people hurt, but maybe we'll kind of coast to a stop now because it felt like we hit and then we bounced a couple of times, and we started sliding forward, and I thought, all right, we'll coast to a stop and I'll assess things then. By the time I had that thought, probably 10 or 15 seconds after the initial impact, the plane flips over. It goes upside down. It kind of cartwheels end to end. And after that, we slid another, I think it was at the 13 or 1400 feet after we hit the ground that the plane flipped over frontwards. And then we slid upside down and backwards for another 4,000 feet. So it was, it was well over a mile from start to finish, at least the piece of the plane that I was in.
Wow. Yeah, it seems like a long time and a long ways to go.
Yeah.
Okay. So it finally stops and you're looking around and realize you've survived. What went through your head first?
We came to stop and I was hanging upside down, still strapped in my chair, one of the very few people in that position. Unbuckled my seatbelt and just kind of dropped down to the ceiling now because we're upside down. And I didn't see any way to get out at that point. The emergency exit was near me. It was gone. It was a wall of burning scrap. So I couldn't. My plan was to open that, and it was gone. So plan B was just to kind of react to what the circumstances were. And smoke was coming from the front of this little section I was in. I had no idea we'd broken off in the rest of the plane. So I'm in a section that's rows. There are 37 rows in the DC-10. I'm in row 23, and I end up in a section that's rows about 20 through about 28 or 29. Pretty small section compared to some of the other ones. And I made my way away from the smoke that was coming from the front to the back, and eventually found an opening in the back of the plane. And there were a couple other guys that weren't hurt seriously like me that just we kind of huddled up real quick. And one of them said to the other two of us, he said, let's just start helping some people and maybe we can find a way out in the process. And so we started doing that. We realized right away that a lot of people were not alive, but the ones that we tried to help, tried to get them their feet and get them toward the back of the plane away from the smoke. And eventually we found that way out where the back of the plane had broken off from where we were. Yeah.
You're helping people get out. And, you eventually, this was kind of a famous moment. You ran back in and helped survive, or found a little girl within the wreckage.
Yeah. That just sort of that just sort of happened, to be very honest with you. And, I got this hero tag, and I'll be honest, it never felt right. It always felt artificial because I just reacted like anybody else, like you would have, anybody else would have. I got outside the plane and I heard a baby crying. And the next thing I know, I'm back inside the wreckage. We're completely full of smoke now. I can't see anything. But I just went back in, followed the cries, and found a baby buried in an overhead bin and just picked her up. She was, I think, 11 months old, and picked her up and shot out the plane the second time. But I didn't think it through. I didn't weigh any risks. I didn't think about becoming a hero. It just happened. You're in a crazy plane crash. You hear a baby crying. You're going to respond to that.
Yeah, which I think it's kind of fascinating. I think that says a lot about human character, right? Like there's times in tragedy. One of the things people say is look for the heroes, but look for the I would say the image of God in people, right? Look for the ways that he runs in to rescue us,
Yeah, exactly right. That's a great metaphor. It really is. And people have told me over the years, I don't know if I would have done that. Of course you would have. You're exiting a burning plane. You hear a baby crying. What do you do? Run away from a baby cry? No, you're going to go back and see what you can do. And I think anybody would, because that's a natural, godly reaction to that circumstance, in my opinion.
Yeah, certainly. Were you praying during this time at all, or were you just kind of like not? That wasn't there?
I was not really. I was praying, just thank God that my wife wasn't there and didn't have to go through this whole thing. But it was more a feeling of peace. I mean, I thought I was going to die in the crash. I was completely convinced I was. I was bought a new life insurance policy, so the practical side of things kind of kicked in. I thought, well, my wife will be taken care of financially. That's good, and so I'm pretty much at peace. But no, there really wasn't much of that. And again, I wasn't a spiritual person at all. I had no spiritual foundation back then at all. But I prayed to a higher being. I didn't really know who God was then, but I just prayed that that we get out of this somehow. And thank you that my wife isn't here.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm a little curious about. I wonder if that peace, was perhaps the presence of God anyway, even though you didn't know Him yet.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. I think that's accurate. Absolutely. I knew there was a God. I just didn't know who He was at that point. But I obviously knew who I was. Well,
obviously, something like this just completely changes your life. Your friend, you mentioned, Jay, died in the crash. And along with it was 112 people total.
Right, 112.
And, I think somewhat miraculously, there were almost 200 who survived.
Right, 184. And yeah, when you see the video, like I have hundreds of times, you wonder how anybody could have survived it.
Yeah, friends, it's worth just going out to YouTube and looking up United Flight 232 and just looking at it to get a sense of, from the outside, what this must have been like, and then just praise God for the fact that anybody survived, because it looks pretty harrowing.
Exactly right. Yeah. Miraculous in my mind.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Which is interesting. I've actually I've heard stories from other people who've shared their story with me about God sending angels to which not necessarily part of your story, but to kind of shepherd airplanes, if you will. And I'm sure that there was some of that. If we want to be spiritual about it, the Lord was there, even though in the midst of the carnage.
Yeah, absolutely. And other survivors have said that same thing.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Okay. So you survive, you get out. I'm sure that was traumatic. You talked a little bit about your kind of response to that, the survivor's guilt, depression. And that kind of led you into a dark place, but it was a place you had to go in order to find the Lord. So tell us about that period afterwards.
Yeah. I was warned by a trauma counselor that this post-trauma stress disorder would hit me. The effects of it would hit me. And I'd never heard that term. And I didn't believe him. I just thought, I'll just brush it off. It's a tragedy, but I'll move on in my life. And I couldn't do that. And all the effects of post-trauma stress hit me. The survivor's guilt, like you said, the anger, the listlessness, the depression, all that stuff that I was warned about what happened to me did happen, just like the counselor said it would. And I quit my job. My marriage has fallen apart. I got 6 brothers and sisters, and my parents were alive at that point. I wouldn't even talk to them. I wouldn't even return their phone. I wouldn't even answer the phone, talk to them at all. And just really wrapped up in that crash and the effects of it, and couldn't sleep and had nightmares about it. There was a little boy that was sitting in a seat in front of me who died in the crash, and this guilt about he dying and I surviving were 2.5 feet apart. He got his whole life in front of him. Just struggled with all that stuff, and there came to a point, like I mentioned earlier, 10-month anniversary of the crash. It was actually 10 months to the day after the crash, where I sat down in a chair. My wife was working. Thank God we had some kind of income. But I just realized that for the first time in my life, and first time in 30 years, I was 29 at the time of the crash, now 30, that I had been knocked down, Eric, and I could not pick myself back up. I couldn't do it on my own anymore. I'd always done things on my own. I worked my way through college and law school when I was an athlete, and all this stuff that I thought I was tough enough to get through anything, and I couldn't do this. And so I just asked God to come into my life. And it wasn't a specific prayer to get a new job or come out of depression or save my marriage. It was just, God, give me, please, some kind of relief from this crash, because I can't do this by myself anymore. And when I said that, I know some people listening to this will think it's corny, and it really didn't happen this way. I swear to you it did. When I said that, something came over me. It wasn't an audible voice. It wasn't a physical thing, but it was this overwhelming feeling of contentment and peace that told me in that moment that because of what I had just done, and more importantly, the ally I just invited in my life, that eventually, not that moment the next day, but eventually I was going to win every single battle because I had the right ally fighting that battle with me. There's just this overwhelming sense of peace that just came through me in that moment. And that was the beginning for me. That was the beginning of the story, not the end of it. A couple of weeks, let me backtrack. I told my wife about it and what had happened, and she recommended I start reading the Bible, and I started doing that. And then I realized after a short time reading the Bible that if I wanted to be like my wife or to be like you and some friends I had, in that my sins were forgiven and my spot in heaven secured, I had one more really big decision to make, and that was to accept Christ as my Savior. And I did that, I think, a couple of weeks, probably about 2.5 weeks after that.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So that sort of surrender moment where you felt the presence of God led you to give him your entire life.
Yeah,
eventually.
Exactly right. Wow. Yes, sir.
Oh, I love that. I'm really curious about, so you give your life to Christ. I'm sure that it still took you some time to work through everything that happened. You talk a little bit about connecting with the pilot. Is it Al Haynes? Yeah, Al Haynes.
Yeah, Al Haynes.
And how that was helpful. But how else did God really help you through that?
Yeah, I think it was this. I think it was God telling me in the early stages after that crash that, this crash is never going to go away, Jerry. It's going to be a part of your life, but I'm going to use that experience for my glory. And I get a very clear picture of that. And after I got that message from God, it was, all right, I'm gonna talk about it. I'm gonna talk about it in churches. I'm gonna talk about it in motivational talks. I'm gonna write a book about it. I'm just gonna face this thing head on and use the experience for God's glory. And I think going back, looking back on it now, and I haven't done this ever since that moment, but I've thought about this the last couple of years. I think when I look back at that whole experience, and especially the time afterward when I finally surrendered to God, it was this. It was God telling me this. It was, Jerry, I finally got your attention.
Yeah.
It took 30 years in a plane crash, but I finally got your attention. And now that I do, I want to tell you about my son. And more importantly, I want you to spend the rest of your life telling other people about my son through this plane crash. I think that's what it was. I think that's why I survived that crash.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So tell us about some of the fruit of that. So if God has given you this message, when you share it with people, how do people respond, and how's God using it?
I think in a secular setting, it is this a secular message that I try to give to people is, life is so short. It's so precious. Let's take advantage of it. If you got a bucket list, you better go out and start checking it off. Or if you've got something you've always wanted to do, and do it with integrity. But life is really short. In one moment, that little boy in front of me is happy and healthy and playing peekaboo over the seat with me. Next moment, he's dead. Yeah. I know how fast it can change. It's not going to be that way for everybody. We're probably going to have tomorrow. Very good chance we'll wake up, we'll be alive tomorrow. But there's a chance we might not, or get a diagnosis or something. So let's really take advantage of the opportunity we have in life. That's the secular message. In churches and Christian groups, it is this. I got stuck in a trap for 30 years with people telling me and me believing that if you scratch God's back, He'll scratch yours. If you do something for Him, He'll do something for you. If you don't mess up very often, and God says, all right, you haven't messed up that much, so I'm going to let you live with me someday. I'll let you in. And I fell in that trap for 30 years, that trap of works. And I was an athlete, and that contributed to it. The harder you work, the better you are, and no pain, no gain, all that. I thought that was God. And I tell people, I fell in that trap of works for 30 years, and that trap of works is a lie. It's a lie. And so I tell people, and I think a lot of people can appreciate that. And your spot in heaven, salvation is not based on works. It's not what you do for God. It's based on faith in His Son. There's nothing you have to do. You don't have to perform. You just have to believe, and you have everlasting life. And I think people can relate. I think especially guys can, because we fall in that trap of works. And we think we gotta work our way through it and earn it, and then we're there.
Yeah,
that's not the truth.
Well, it's such a stark contrast to kind of the life that we generally live, right? Where we have, we have our career, we have, like you were talking about, sports or even relationships, right? I can be successful if I do all the right ththings, right? That can be kind of the mindset, and the gospel really is antithetical to that. It's like, no, that's not true. Or, you can't do all the right things for God. You have to simply trust Him and follow Him. That's the key.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where a lot of people get in that trap, like I was in. I mean, I can appreciate where people are. I wasn't a Christian until I was 30 years old. I didn't do it at Bible school when I was 7 or anything like that. I lived life and experienced this tragedy, and then became a Christian. And I think people can appreciate that this lie that I was always believing is gone now, and hopefully people can understand that and appreciate it and do the same thing I did.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. Okay. Well, I'm curious. So that's a huge story. Obviously, that's really the big piece in the moment where you come to Christ. So thank you for sharing that with us. I'm really curious beyond that. So what have you learned about yourself kind of in these moments, and what do you feel like God is, developing beyond all that for you?
Yeah, that's what I look back on now and see with God is that He wants me to use my life, my platform, my broadcasting, this plane crash, the book, anything I have, to serve Him, to give Him glory and point people toward His Son. I mean, that really is what I wake up in the morning and is my goal. That's my number one priority in my life, is to do those two things: give God glory and point people toward His Son. So everything I do, every encounter I have, every interview I do, every person listening on the radio that I have this platform with the Rockies with, hopefully is affected in some way. Some a little bit, some more than others, depending on the setting. So that's really where I look at it. That's how I see my life being played out. It is, you can enjoy life. There's nothing wrong with enjoying life and having nice things and a great family, and I love to cycle and all that kind of stuff. Nothing wrong with that. But I want you to use it all for my glory. And so that's what I pray every day, is that I will do that. That I will use my experience that I've had in my life and the experience I'll have each day to serve Him.
Oh yeah, I'm curious. Do you pray for your audience on the radio when you go?
I do. I not necessarily on the radio, but
sure.
I do when I go speak at places, when I do motivational talks and churches and that sort of thing. I do. I pray that God will put the right people there. When I'm broadcasting a Rockies game, I'm thinking more about how to describe the 4-6-3 double play rather than what my audience might be composed of.
That makes sense. That's awesome. I think that's just really, really fascinating how God not only got your attention, but really changed your perspective from one of trying to live up to something to trying to share Christ with everybody that you meet.
Yeah. Yeah, and my priorities since that time have completely changed. And like I said, Jesus is my first priority, and used to be before the crash my career. That was everything, and I loved my wife, but she was not a priority. My career was, and I was going to be, next to Al Michaels or Bob Costas or somebody, and be rich and famous and on TV, and all that has completely changed. I mean, my career is important, but it certainly isn't a priority anymore.
Yeah, not the same level.
Nope.
Okay, so I'm curious about this question. One of the questions I like to ask people is about their relationship with God since they came to Christ. And so I'm curious if you've ever had a moment since then when God felt far away, or if you felt like he was not there, and kind of what that experience was like.
Yeah, I think we all have those. I think no matter who you are, what level, what your experience has been, you have those moments. For me, it was career. There was a couple of jobs that I really wanted that I didn't get, and I prayed about. Thought, oh God, if you just put me in here, just think of this platform I'd have if I did this. And for me, it was like national jobs. It was network level tough stuff that I applied for and never got. And I thought, well, I could be even more exposed with my story about the plane crash, and I could tell more people about Jesus if I had this and I didn't get the job. I was like, well, God, are you listening? Are you there? That really is it. For me, it's those moments where I really thought that I could be used more by God, and he's saying, nope, I don't want you there. I want you here. So those are times when I doubted, but at the end of the day, it's always the same. It's God, I'm going to trust you. I wouldn't have written the script this way, but I don't write perfect scripts, so you just keep on writing them for me.
Yeah, that's good. Well, it's interesting how that brings you back to trust, right? So yeah, I find that that's really part of the experience. And I think, if we're honest about those kind of times when we do have the questions for God, and we think, well, this would work perfect, right, Lord? This would be great. And he doesn't kind of deliver on that. Right. It questions not really his character, although it feels that way sometimes. It really questions our commitment to him and our surrender to him. Yeah, exactly right. And I think when you have those thoughts about, God, why didn't you come through in this situation? Why didn't this happen? You doubt yourself. I think you're exactly right, Eric. You think, all right, am I really committed? Because if I am, I'll trust whatever happens. And I can tell you this, the longer I've lived, and I just turned 59, the more I find myself trusting God, and the less upset I get when things don't go the way I think they should be. Yeah. And I get to that point where, all right, God, I hear you, I trust you, and I'm just going to go with you. I get to that point a lot quicker than I used to. Yeah. I think that, and which I think is healthy. Are there any recent examples that you would want to share about some way that you've found yourself trusting God that you thought, oh, maybe I wouldn't have done that a few years ago? Yeah, there's lots of examples there. I think one for me is I thought I had a great shot at this job about 6 months ago when I was doing back in the NBA on a national level and being one of the broadcasters, and I didn't get that job. And it turns out that the radio station I work at in Denver, KOA, is allowing me to start a new program that I've always wanted to do. It's starting this program called Amazing Americans on KOA. It's a weekly 1 hour interview where I just interview incredible, inspiring, motivating people like the cancer survivor who just climbed Mount Everest. I mean, people like that. I always wanted to do that show and never had the opportunity. Well, I got said no to this national job at the same time this program at KOA opens up, and I'm doing it now starting in January. So that's one example where I thought, boy, that door is closed, but then wait, this door opened over here, which is really a blessing. Yeah, no, that's a great example. I love that. And I'll be listening for that. That'll be good. Oh, good. Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, no, I think that's exactly how God works sometimes. And so just having the wherewithal to say, okay, I'm going to trust that and let's see what else happens. Yeah. Is a good thing. Wow. Yep. How has your opinion, or how's the way you relate with other people changed, and kind of your goal for your own spirituality? Yeah. I think when I first became a Christian, shortly after the plane crash, I think I was a little nervous about letting other people know what my spiritual conviction is, that I had become a Christian and a follower of Jesus. And that was
first priority in my life. To me anymore, it doesn't matter. If I make somebody uncomfortable, then that God needs to work on them. I can't do anything about that. So I think I'm more bold. I'm bolder these days, Eric, and sharing the faith and putting on Facebook and Twitter and social media that I'm a Christian and number one, a Jesus follower, where 10 years ago I was like, geez, should I put that on there or not? That might, that might dissuade some people, or they might not think the right way of me if I did that. Anymore, I don't care. I just do it and let God take care of the consequences.
Yeah, that's an interesting conundrum when you have, a much larger platform, right? Like, how do I speak about Christ in this and be really faithful to the message and the calling, but also, sometimes you'll hear people put the gospel like out there in a way that's not interesting or not, it just turns people off. So you kind of have to deal with that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's smart ways to do it. I happen to think that going downtown Denver on 16th Street Mall and start yelling about Jesus does no good. I think it's counterproductive. I really do. I think it turns people off. But if I'm in a setting where I can tell people about my experience and how my life completely changed and my eternal life is complete, then I'm going to do that. And if I'm going to put on my Facebook page that I'm a follower of Christ, number one, I'm going to do that and really trust God with how people react to that. So you can be bold, but you have to at the same time be smart about it. You don't want to put it in people's face because that's, like I said, I think counterproductive.
Yeah, and there's a time for everybody, right? So there's a moment, and it's really embracing what God's doing in that person's life. Like those more intimate moments that you talk about, when you're sitting with somebody, might be more appropriate.
Yeah, and I think in my business too, Eric, it's encounter a lot of people, especially during the baseball season. You're in the public eye and all that. Just the way you conduct yourself and the way you live your life, I think is much about telling people about Jesus is doing it verbally. I always tell people, and I think about this a lot myself, if you can't tell people who Jesus is, show them. Yeah. Show people who he is by living a Christ-like life.
Yeah.
Do I do it all the time? No, I don't. I mess up a lot, but I try, and I try to keep getting better at it every day.
Yeah. Amen. I love that. If you can't tell people who Jesus is, show them. Friends, that is a challenge right there. I love that.
Yeah.
That definitely, and I can imagine in the sports world, I don't know, you'll have to tell me, but that it's I know there are a lot of believers, but it can be an interesting environment with a lot of egos and a lot of people who, have kind of a lot invested in themselves, which is fine. But that can bleed over. And so I imagine being a Christ-like presence stands out.
Yeah, I think it does in this business a little bit because, sports is all about entertainment and money and exposure and, power and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a tough environment at times to be able to preach Jesus. And so sometimes you just have to keep your mouth shut and do the right thing rather than maybe say the right thing.
Oh, yeah. Be Jesus. You don't always have to preach it. Be him.
Yeah, exactly right.
I love that. All right. Wow. Well, Jerry, I really appreciate you sharing your story just a little bit. Friends, you can I would recommend wholeheartedly Jerry's book, Chosen to Live, which he describes in a lot more detail than we went here about the plane crash and his experience with converting or just giving his life to Christ. And there's links in the show notes at halfwaytherepodcast.com, so you'll find that there as well. Jerry, anything you want to leave us with?
I think there's two groups of people. Let me say it that way, Eric. Two groups of people in the world. Group one is the one that's had a tragedy happen to them, and group two is the one that will. Tragedy is going to hit. Some kind of craziness is going to hit your life, and I just hope that if you're listening, you'll be better equipped than I was to handle that when that tragedy comes. Like my wife says all the time, everybody has their own plane crash, and if they haven't had it yet, it's coming. And I just hope that people be better equipped to handle that tragedy. And the best way to be equipped by that is to know God and to know His Son. It gets a lot easier when that happens.
Yeah, amen, friends. If you don't know Jesus, give your life to Him now, or ask a friend, or shoot me an email. I'd be happy to correspond with you as well, which there's a contact link at halfwaytherepodcast.com. So, Jerry, thanks so much for sharing your story again. I appreciate it. It's great to connect with you.
Absolutely, my pleasure. Thanks for having me on, Eric.